Welcome. I'm Erica Malinowski, no W and no relation, co-president of SOMA Action. And with me asking questions will also be Barbara Velasquez, who is the chair of our Social and Racial Justice Committee, as well as a member of our executive committee. SOMA Action is a grassroots organization dedicated to driving progressive change. And as part of that, we put out a voter guide for every election, interviewing and evaluating candidates about their support for the issues our committees are working on. Please note that questions are restricted to areas where our committees are active, so there are some important issues we don't cover, and we hope that voters will seek out candidates and learn more. Today, we're joined by Lieutenant Governor Tahisha Way, a candidate for New Jersey's 11th Congressional District. Lieutenant Governor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Could you please introduce yourself and tell us why you're running for Congress?
Sure, and I thank you, Barbara, and I thank you, Erica, and all of SOMA for having me. And I look forward to our great conversation. My name is Tahisha Way, and today I am stepping up once again to run not for myself, but for the people who are counting on me. Because right now, Trump is stripping away our fundamental rights, opportunities, and our health care. The stakes for New Jersey couldn't be higher. See, I was raised in a proud union household. My dad, he was that MTA bus driver. My mom, she was a rail clerk working nights. I used to do my homework riding along with my dad on his route when my parents didn't have childcare. They gave me the principles that guide me today, which are faith, service, and resilience. But when I was 19 years old, in the middle of a rising junior year of college, I was rushed to the hospital unconscious. Doctors told my parents I had suffered a cerebral hemorrhage, and they warned that my recovery would be long and that I would never regain my vision, and that I should prepare for a different life than the one I dreamed of. So I woke up scared and unsure if I'd ever be the same. See, my parents' health insurance covered the surgery that saved my life, but when it came time for my occupational therapy that I needed to fully recover, the insurance company said no. They denied it, and guess what? I had to fight alone by myself to recover. From that hospital room, however, I went on to law school. I became a county commissioner, a state judge, and eventually secretary of state and lieutenant governor. And those principles early on in life have been my North Star. Now, as secretary of state, I lead New Jersey and have led New Jersey through one of the most consequential fights for voting rights in modern history. Under my leadership, we have modernized voting systems, we've expanded early in-person voting, we've strengthened vote by mail, and implemented automatic voter registration. And when Donald Trump has sued me to interfere in our elections, guess what? I've stood up to him and I've won. He and his Republican friends have sued me again and again, but every time they come after your rights, I have stood our ground. In my work, my life, my family's life, oftentimes there has been threats leveled against me because I've stood up to Trump. There were days when I've had to advise my elections team to go home and work as a result of this. And yet, I've never backed down. I've never stopped working for our democracy. And as lieutenant governor, I have expanded mental health services. I've strengthened tenant protection, supported small businesses, and helped families to ensure their utilities would not get shut off. And long before that, as a Passaic County commissioner and as the director, I expanded services with stabilizing taxes on families already stretched thin. So why am I running for Congress? Because I've seen what attacks are on our democracy and attempts to strip us of our most fundamental rights, the right to vote. Now, our president is also stripping New Jerseyans of health care, Medicare, Medicaid, and cutting taxes for his billionaire cronies when families can't afford groceries. I know Donald Trump's playbook because I've gone up against it and I have won. I am the only candidate in this race who has done that and can beat him. And that's exactly what I'll do in Washington. Fight relentlessly against him and his MAGA cronies who want to destroy our democracy and make life impossible for New Jersey families. And here's what I'll do: I will lower costs for families. I'll fight and cut junk fees, lower prescription drug prices. I will protect healthcare because I know what it's like when the system denies you of it. And I'll make sure New Jersey families never face that fear alone. I will bring good paying jobs to New Jersey, and I'll defend local jobs and strengthen our economy. And I will always defend democracy because democracy is the floor to every single opportunity. And what sets me apart is simple: I'm the only candidate in this race who has served as an educator. I have protected families as a judge. I have delivered for communities as a county official and defended democracy as Secretary of State and Lieutenant Governor. And of course, again, I am the only one who has taken on Donald Trump and won. The stakes are too high, but I know we are strong. I've survived the fight of my life. I've fought for this state through tough times, through attacks from Donald Trump, through unprecedented threats to our rights. And now I am ready to fight for you, for your families, for your rights, and for your future. Let's build a brighter New Jersey and nation where every family has a fair shot. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'll turn it over to Barbara to ask the first set of questions.
Sure.
Unmute, please, Barbara.
Sorry about that. Good afternoon, Lieutenant Governor.
Good afternoon, Barbara.
You're running to be one of 435 voting members of one House of Congress. That's power, but it is limited. Realistically, what will you have the power to do as a U.S. representative? And won't you have the power to do?
Yeah, that's a fair question because for me, I think most importantly, we'll be adding a strong voice who's been in the ring to oppose Donald Trump successfully. And there are very few in Congress right now, in my humble opinion, who are more qualified than me to push back on this administration, especially when they try to interfere with our elections. I've done that, the proven results as Secretary of State, and I will definitely do it in Washington. But realistically speaking, as a freshman, I like to be authentic with you. And I think that what is key are your constituent services and making sure that every action which I take is focused on making life more affordable and fair for the residents of NJ11. See, again, I was raised in a working class union household, and I know the hard choices and challenges that families across this district have to make. And I will definitely make sure, just like I have at both of my offices, Lieutenant Governor and Secretary of State, and even when I was a county commissioner, to have those strong constituent services timely and responsive to each and every one of the residents of CD11.
Thank you. What skills does a congressperson need to be effective, and how have you demonstrated those skills?
Sure. I think simply a good member is someone who can work with anyone, still holding true to their values and principles. So when they have to fight back against things, I also think that one should be a coalition builder. As the president of the National Association of Secretaries of State, that's exactly what I did throughout my entire tenure. That's exactly what I've done, trying to find common ground across the aisle to work with, reasonable minded Republicans. I look at one of my first acts as lieutenant governor was when I signed as acting governor bipartisan legislation that made New Jersey a leader in fiscal transparency so that all of our citizens know exactly where their tax dollars are going.
Thank you. Often in politics, donors, political bosses, and other people with power will try to persuade you to prioritize their initiatives over those of your constituents. Now, this could be by making you dependent on their money, having
Mhm.
control over your career, or simply building relationships that make it hard to say no to your friends. What have you done, or what will you do to keep yourself free from these entanglements and protect against them unduly impacting your judgment?
Well, thank you for that question, Barbara, because I started off my remarks with it is all about you, the people, right? And I have pledged not to take corporate PAC money. My campaign is actually funded by thousands of individual donors who are excited and enthused about, me going down there to take on the fight to Donald Trump.
Thank you. Um, no one is perfect, but we're looking for leaders who create a culture that holds themselves and those around them to high standards of responsible and ethical public service.
Hmm,
For
hmm.
any for any leadership position that you've held, could you think back to a time when you realized, oh, there's a risk here that me or my staff might be tempted to abuse power or behave unethically? And what measures did you put in place to prevent that from happening? Or if someone did slip up, what did you do to correct it um, as quickly as possible and make sure that it doesn't happen again?
Yeah, well, you know something, this to me is one of the important things that we as public servants should be laser focused on, right? Transparency and ethics. As an attorney, I take it serious. In all of my roles, I've taken my oath seriously. And that is why in my departments, I set a standard, and I'm going to start with my Secretary of State office because that's where elections is. However, I made certain that myself and others will present an election administration overall guardians of democracy in a nonpartisan way because we want our voters to trust and have confidence in our system. Now, I've already recused myself, right? And I ask the same out of all of my staff members whenever there's an issue that might be somewhat of conflict. I've recused myself from anything to do with this election. I did not even certify the November election because I think that that's significant and important, and it builds confidence. And throughout my entire career, I want to say that I've always put public service over politics and done what's right. And that's what I would continue to do as a rep at Washington. And I was one of the um, cabinet members, if you will, in this administration who proudly served on the state's ethics commission. And I took that responsibility strongly and making sure that not only, there are those who might have conflicts within like my universe of a department, but also outside. So these are the things, again, I would come to bring to bear to DC.
Thank you. I will now turn it over to Erica, who will continue with the next set of questions.
Thank you, Barbara. The next set are some big picture questions. Our assumption is that we are in a time of attempted authoritarian takeover. Instead of politics as usual, we need to draw on the much deeper set of strategies that nonviolent civil resistance movements around the globe have used to reclaim their government when a ruler tries to insist that they get to do whatever they want with all the power and the money. First, do you agree with this assessment? And if so, what do you think needs to happen to get us to a place where we have a healthy and functional democratic government?
Yeah, I agree with the assumption, that we are in a very dark time, if you will, of authoritarian takeover. And that's why, I have pushed back every day in my work as Secretary of State, making sure that New Jerseyans and their vote is sheltered from all of this. I've said it before and I'll repeat it, sadly so. There's no rule of law because Trump and the Republicans, they have sued me. I've been attacked. And, but none of it can deter me from protecting our democracy because ultimately, from day one, when I started in 2018, my mission has always been to create a healthy democracy because democracy is the floor to all opportunities. And if we don't have a democracy, question how can we fully address economic inequality? If we don't have a democracy, how are we then going to educate our students, our kids fully, right? So as a Black woman, I must also say that I'm keenly aware of the value of enfranchisement, right? And the extreme sacrifices required to create this fair and free democracy. The beautiful thing about New Jersey, so many beautiful things, but one beautiful fact is that we have the first African American male post Civil War to cast his ballot, Thomas Mundy Peterson from Perth Amboy. That stands for something.
And I think you've already largely answered the follow-up question for this. We're asking the same questions for
Mhm.
everyone. What have you already done to promote having a functioning democracy, and what would your role as a representative be? So there's anything you want to add to that?
Sure. Could you just repeat the question? I'm
Oh, yeah.
sorry.
What have you already done to promote having a functioning democracy, which you spoke to, and what would your role as a representative be to promote democracy?
Sure. I think that if you look back at my record, again, I've modernized our election infrastructure. We've had the highest voter turnout, if you will, on record. I look at how, which is a beautiful thing in 2020, we led the nation in youth voter turnout. Can you believe that? But again, modernizing our infrastructure, opening up mail-in voting, expanding that, I should say, implementing AVR, OVR, in-person early voting. But another part of my portfolio, which I would like to lift up, is the coalition part and the civic engage part. And so what I would translate this to going down to DC, of course, making sure that the Trump and the Republicans are not going to break any of these access to eligible voters rules. But at the same time, I want to make sure that the John Lewis Act, right, gets passed. That's significant and important. And I also would want to continue the tradition of building these coalitions because what happens is sometimes, there could be two individuals, two institutions who may not think like, but they still might work towards a common good, which we have seen on the ground, even with my census work. That was another, I want to say, program in 2020 in which we shattered records 30 years in the making, ensuring that all of the voices in New Jersey are counted fully.
One of the reasons we think our country is so vulnerable to authoritarianism right now is that we've spent decades concentrating wealth in the hands of a few, while ordinary
Mhm.
people become less and less able to meet their basic needs. And while you won't have the power to single-handedly change that, what do you think we should be working toward in terms of ensuring that everyone can meet their basic needs and wealth isn't too concentrated?
Something, that's why I am proud to have co chaired the New Jersey Wealth Disparity Task Force, where I have seen firsthand how the racial wealth gap and gender pay gap, too, are not abstract concepts. They affect families' ability to build stability, secure housing, and of course, plan for future. So we all know that Congress can act. Congress can lower the costs. But the question truly becomes whether we have the right leaders with the will and experience to fight for working families over any special interests. And I'm that fighter. That's why I've been privileged to ensure that there are programs within even my department. I'll name one, that dealt with um, putting diversity into arts leadership programs. That was a summer program for our college students, making sure that they too could be in that pipeline so that that could combat any wealth disparity generationally.
And throughout US history, one of the most potent weapons deployed to stop efforts to broadly distribute wealth has been stoking racism.
Mm-hmm.
Historically, that includes dividing and conquering rebellions against plantation owners, breaking union attempts to challenge factory owners, persuading municipalities to destroy public goods like pools rather than share them, and persuading ordinary people to cut their own healthcare and social safety nets as long as it means those people don't get any. What will you or your allies do to counter this dynamic when it gets deployed to try to block the goals you just talked about?
Yeah, sadly, so racism is used to divide people. So the powerful can keep rigging, right? Economies and other social concepts. And I will always name it clearly, right? Especially as an African American and woman. And I would refuse to let it set racism, set any agenda. So I will fight to build multiracial cross community coalitions like I have done throughout my career around what families actually need, right? Centering on the focus. We're talking about the good jobs, we're talking about affordable housing, fair wages, and healthcare. And I will protect, as I've done, the civil rights and voting rights enforcement that makes it harder for extremists to suppress voices and distort our democracy for economic gain. Another pride and privilege of mine was the simple idea that in my tourism portfolio, Black heritage tourism, and that spurred the state, and then the governor signed the legislation to now have significant markers throughout our state of all of those historical points in hopes that not only visitors, but those who live here as residents can look at these markers, self reflect, and understand that racism has no place in our society.
Another major barrier to progressive change has been the right wing exploiting people's fear of being harmed, particularly their fear of experiencing violence in their own home or community, to scare voters away from inclusive policies. And to counter this, we need to adequately address people's safety fears. So, what do you think works to keep people safe? And what do you see as the federal government's role in promoting that?
Sure. I think that the federal government's role should be the protector of her people, leading and championing legislation centered on the basic protections of help in making sure that our families do not feel that they are in a crisis. So I start with legislation that I signed, right? The prevention or making sure of the disclosure of lead, testing for tenants, including landlord disclosure. And I have also signed legislation, right, so that our those who are suffering addiction, they can safeguard themselves and not be exploited. And that legislation cracked down on deceptive marketing and patient brokering. I also, signed legislation making sure that during extreme heat, utility shut-offs would not occur. So again, in Congress, I will fund and enforce public health, housing safety, environmental protections, and consumer protections, and will stop extremism from undermining basic governments. I said this before, sadly so, throughout my entire tenure, there have been threats leveled against me just because that I'm the chief election official, which should never be. So I would also, make sure that those who are running elections too can feel protected because I know how it feels. Election officials, we're only trying to work 24/7 just so that our voters can vote freely and safely.
How do we counter attempts to use fear about safety to justify harm against immigrants, trans people, people of color, and other vulnerable groups?
Yeah, that's important because we live in a world of messaging, especially social media. And I'm not being disrespectful here, but I've had to battle misinformation campaigns, especially on the elections front. And how you do that is you have to move timely, you must communicate clearly, and make it easy for people to verify. That is why I made certain that we in the state propped up a portal where voters can easily verify information. It's a seamless experience. So, my approach in Washington would be similar, engaging in both public education campaigns so that citizens understand their full rights, as well as accountability, supporting legislation that will also crack down on purveyors of misinformation.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn it back over to Barbara for the next set of questions. And you're muted again, Barbara.
So sorry. Um, could you tell us about the times when you have supported immigrants, even when doing so was risky?
Sure. I mentioned that I was the lead for our 2020 census. And that's when Trump tried to add an immigration question to the census so that undocumented would not get counted. And I stood up for that to him and I fought back and took him to court. And we were successful, a no go, because every single resident deserved to be counted, period. And I have also, as acting governor, signed legislation that has penalized employers who disclose or threaten to disclose an employee's immigration status. Again, immigrants need to feel, that they too are worthy of fair representation and resources. And that's what we did in the census, going back to that one.
Thank you. Have you advocated for the Immigrant Trust Act at the state level?
I'm sorry, I can hear you, Barbara. Can
Have
you?
you advocated for the Immigrant Trust Act at the state level?
Yes, what I can say is that we have the Immigration Trust Act at the state, and, I have not gone against it whatsoever.
Okay. Could you tell us about times when you've supported trans and other LGBTQIA people, even when doing so was risky?
Well, the first thing is I firmly believe in policies that expand dignity and economic inclusion for the transgender and LGBTQIA community. I was proud, you know, uh, to be there with New Jersey's state backed certification program for LGBTQIA owned businesses. To make access to contracting opportunities and government programs more accessible, and that's what I would do in Washington.
Thank you. Could you give examples of when you have prioritized climate action, even though there were competing priorities?
Yeah, I think the first thing we have to recognize in New Jersey as a coastal state, we are vulnerable to flooding, heat, and other extreme weather events. And I've always been vocal about protecting our environment. Even before I started in government, I was an editor for my University of Virginia Law Journal. And for me, I took um, our climate very seriously, making sure that we are the protector and understand climate action needs. I was also an original Highlands Council member, and I made sure we had a plan that addressed the climate impact on our water and our lands. And I was proud, on a separate note, again, to sign the summer termination program to prevent any utility shutoffs during extreme heat. So in Congress, I will bring federal funding back. That's the goal to NJ 11 to ensure that we remain resilient to the effects on the climate crisis, as well as champion legislation that allows us to transition to a green economy while creating good paying jobs.
Thank you. How have you prioritized diversity, equity, and inclusion in your own organizations and more broadly, even while it's been under attack?
Yeah, something that's significant and important, addressing longstanding inequities in our economy has always been central to my work as a public servant. I have first always surrounded myself with diverse teams and made sure to elevate people of color, elevate women, elevate those in LGBTQIA into leadership positions in my staff, because how else are you going to effectively and genuinely govern for your constituents without the diverse perspectives and experiences? And I do believe that that adds to the success, right, of all that comes out of your work. I've implemented and co-chair the Workforce Development and Diversity Committee for our Film and Television Commission in our state, giving those without connections, the brown and black communities, the underserved, the opportunity to put themselves in the pipeline of film industry success. And in Congress, I'll advance, these policies that expand access to capital for underserved entrepreneurs. I will strengthen fair housing enforcement and work to invest in education and workforce training programs that do open the door to high wage careers.
Thank you. What do you support doing to make healthcare accessible and affordable for everyone, including vaccines, contraception, abortion care, and gender affirming care?
Again, I know firsthand what it feels like when insurance doesn't cover your needs. And I don't want anyone else to have to experience what I experienced. A 19-year-old individual student alone, and had to rehabilitate her own self. So I would expand access, of course, protect reproductive freedom. I'm a mom of 4 girls, and treat mental health like it's supposed to be treated health. And here in New Jersey, I've helped lead, and support a statewide reproductive health information hub to make it easier for people to find care and understand their rights. I have helped to launch the free 24/7 mental telehealth services for New Jersey college students so that they don't have a stigma, and it is free of cost. And I've made stronger protections for people seeking addiction treatment, targeting deceptive and exploitive practices. And these are the things that I too will bring to bear in DC as that fighter for this.
Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to mention that we haven't covered?
I I would definitely. I want to again first thank you, Barbara, and team Erica, for just having this conversation. I think policy wise, most of my fellow candidates and I, we're aligned. We want to bring down costs, right? We want to invest in our communities, and we want to fight Donald Trump. And the difference here is that I've done it because I'm the only candidate who has worked as an educator, a local government official, a state judge, and has the statewide proven results and experience to serve the people of CD 11, New Jersey, and beyond. I've taken the fight to Donald Trump and won, and I'm continuing the fight now. And I'm just humbly asking for, the consideration for me to be that fighter and that strong fighter in CD 11 to DC. So thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your vision for New Jersey's 11th Congressional District. We really appreciate you taking the time and joining us.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.